Welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine and the continuation of last week's theme. There was a lot of change in last week's show. We discussed what had happened at Takara, a new winemaker, followed by a new chef at the restaurant, changes at Ernie Els, changes about Tour de Toren with new ownership. Well, this week it's a huge change at one of the most important winemaking companies in South Africa. The company is Distell. They look after all manner of spirits, setting them far and wide across the world. Ones we're very familiar with, such as Amarula, as well as some slightly smaller brands that are starting to pick up recognition. People like Baines and a whiskey that's now being compared to some of the best out of Scotland and Japan. But it's also wine that Distell has a huge role in distributing around the world. And to that end, a new company has been started within the Distell family. It is the Libertas Estates and Vineyards. And what Distell have done is they've taken their wine brands and they've brought them together into a small and compact company under Kay Nash to focus on taking their wine product, spreading it more broadly around the world, and taking some really strong, in many cases, some very old vineyards and labels and making the most of them. Richard Rushton, who's the CEO of Distell, is a good mate of mine. He probably should have carried on with his cricket career, if not that, onto his golf career, but he's done okay in the liquor industry, and in fact his son is now a very promising young professional golfer. But Richard's done a lot of great things with Distell over the last few years, and his latest move has been to create this shift in their wine business. And so they've got brands in this business that'll be very familiar to you. Needburg is the biggest one, Fleur du Cap is in there, Alto is in there, Allesverloren. We're looking at all four of those today. You've also got Plaisir de Merle, you've got Pongratz, you've got Durbanville Hills, amongst others. So it's a really nice selection of some big brands. And for me, that's very important for them to be able to come together and do well, because they've got the money and the resources to fly the South African flag very high around the world. And if you start getting people talking about and from there drinking South African wine, hopefully there's a knock-on effect to the rest of our wine producers, and the whole industry wins as a result. So very best of luck to Richard, to Kay, and to the team both at Distell and at Libertas Estates and Vineyards. And to that end, I've got 4 wines from 4 of those estates to have a crack at this week. Now, the first wine comes from Fleur du Cap. I'm a big believer in the power of brand marketing and how the right sort of sponsorship can do so much for a particular brand. I think how many people still associate cricket with Standard Bank, for instance, or Castle Lager with all manner of South African sport. For me, whenever I think of Fleur du Cap, I think of theatre and the Fleur du Cap Awards and how much Fleur du Cap has supported the South African theatre industry. And I always like to support people I think are supporting things that I'm fond of or partial to or am appreciative of support for. And theatre is one of those. So I've always had that soft spot for Fleur du Cap, but also at a more simple level, they've always made some very pleasant wine. And this is their Unfiltered Merlot. It's the 2014, so 5 years of Unfiltered Merlot here. It's a more natural process, which the belief is should bring out a little more of the flavour and create a slightly more robust wine. Leaves it a little more natural as well. So if you're a hemp and sandal wearing resident of Observatory, in between lighting your roll up and jumping up and down on your compost heap, this is the kind of wine that perhaps leans a little more towards your vegan organic tendencies. It's not necessarily vegan or organic itself, but the unfiltered nature means it's a wine that has a slightly more natural process to it all. So if you can keep a secret just between ourselves, had I tried that at a blind tasting, I probably wouldn't have leapt into the air and yelled out to everybody in the room, "That's unfiltered!" I wouldn't have picked it up. My palate's not quite a Michael Frigion. But the fact that it is unfiltered probably contributes to the fact that there's a nice richness and fullness of flavour to this Merlot. Again, dispelling that myth that Merlot's a little one-dimensional, the boring accountant you don't want to meet at a dinner party of the wine world. There's a nice depth to it, there's a nice smokiness to it, and it is a nice Merlot. It's not quite perhaps in the Shannon Merlot or the Creation Reserve Merlot space, but it's still eminently drinkable, perfectly pleasant, and it's unfiltered as well, so I definitely feel healthier drinking it. Don't know if I should, but I do. On to the big hitter, not just of the Distell group, but arguably South African wine. I'm not sure there's a better known South African wine name than Needburg. And there are a couple of reasons for that. One of them is the marketing, the spend and push behind it. Needburg is attached to Team Dimension Data and their work on the Tour de France, and you see Needburg all over the world. The Needburg auction is rightly famous for doing a terrific job in the local industry. But Needburg's also well known because they do make some very good wine. Now, it's easy to knock Needburg, particularly if you're a wine snob. My friend Trevor Gruber, who is a newspaper editor and is responsible for 18% of all tweets in Southern Africa on any given day, particularly if Arsenal are losing again, is very much of the I won't drink Needburg school thought. It's never appealed to me. And at some point, Trevor, I'm going to give you some Needburg. You're not going to know it's Needburg. You're going to tell me it's lovely, and I'm going to go, ha ha ha, it's Needburg. Because although they make vast amounts of wine, and it can seem like a slightly ubiquitous brand because it is just everywhere, there is really good wine being made by that Needburg brand. And so while I love to support the smaller houses and the independents and wine you might not have heard of, it's also right to give credit to people who do a huge amount for the industry. Distell in general, Needburg in particular. I think they've not just made really good wine, but they've done a great job in showcasing South African wine. Because of that, I'm very happy to be trying this. Your previous wine, your Merlot, that was about 170 rand a bottle. This is just under 100, the Edelrot. And although it sounds faintly German or Austrian, as though it could be some sort of horrid Christmas wine full of all sorts of herbs and spices and cheap red, it is in fact a Cab Sauv Merlot blend. Very simple, 2/3 Cab Sauv, a third Merlot coming together in a very simple blend that at about 95 rand a bottle sits at the more affordable range of some of the higher end wines you'll find. Now when I look at the back of the label here, which you can't see because it's facing me, it has the chart for the recommended amount of alcohol to drink in the UK, because this bottle was destined for the UK market. They've got a great guy in the UK looking after the Distell brand, a guy called Joseph. He's from one of those parts of England where you can't understand a word he says, but he seems really pleasant and he's always happy to buy me a drink. And Joseph is going to be one of the guys who's selling all of this wine and showcasing it to a British market, and hopefully getting people in the UK to start realizing that South African wine is worth more than just the 2 or 3 quid they might be used to paying at a Tesco's or a Sainsbury's. This is probably not going to be that much more expensive than those bottles of wine, but it's the quality that's so important, and getting the combination of the understanding of quality and from there the understanding of paying a higher price for that quality, that's a really big challenge for South African wine. But it's one we'll meet, and our quality of South African wine dictates, I've got no doubt, we'll get there sooner rather than later. And to use a horribly hackneyed wine phrase, that is easy drinking, and that's exactly what it is. The Cab Sauv polished off with the Merlot, the 2-to-1 ratio, and it's just a very simple drink. It's nothing complicated, nothing too complex. It's a nice simple red blend, 95 rand a bottle. It's something I can see myself happily having a glass or two of during the course of the week, in between of course doing my press-ups, sit-ups and crunches. Now, a warning when it comes to this particular wine: when it opens you might hear some schoolgirlish squeals of delight in the background, because there are 2 guys who I work with that Dan really likes wine. One is Stefanos Rabi, who's busy running around California with a model he's convinced to marry him and having a wonderful time. And the other is a Portuguese guy called Ronaldo. No, not that Ronaldo. Basically, if that's that Ronaldo, then this is the other Ronaldo. But he's a delightful guy. He's very proudly Portuguese, and that means he generally arrives smelling faintly of Nando's whenever we're filming anything, and anything remotely Portuguese he gets very excited about. He's convinced he's going to marry Jeannie D one day, so Jeannie, if you're listening, Ronaldo is available, and I suspect will be for some time to come. But he's also very, very happy when anything from his native country comes onto the horizon, which means this puts a big smile on his face, because the Tinto Baraka is of course a Portuguese grape. It comes from Allesverloren, all are lost, and it is again part of the Distell family. Now this is out in the Swartland, and that explains why a Portuguese grape is being found in South Africa. It's drier territory, it speaks to the kind of terroir that you'll find in Portugal, where this Tinto Baraka finds its more natural home. I really like seeing wine in places you don't expect them. It's like discovering Pinotage in Canada, where it's actually doing surprisingly well. Here we've got Tinto Baraka down on the west coast of South Africa, as we're starting to see some of the Greek varietals. You may remember from the end of last year talking about Greek grapes being grown by people like Ibn Sadi. This has been going for a little while longer, and it's a wine that I've drunk a lot of over the years. It's a fairly familiar wine, I'm sure, to most of you. Eye-catching name. It's the dry grape that mirrors the conditions from which it comes in Portugal and in which it has found a new home in South Africa. So you look at it, that colour, there's a real plummy red to it, and an interesting nose. It's almost got a sort of Christmas cake feel to it, which would normally put me off, because the best way to eat Christmas cake is to give it to somebody else. But I've had this before, it's always been good, and so I shall set aside my Christmas cake prejudice and give the wine a try. Oh, definitely not Christmas cake, and it's lovely. It's certainly dry, there's no sweetness to it, but don't mistake dryness for lack of character, because there is still depth to it. A nice big round mouthful of wine, and a nice finish as well. Sometimes that dry wine just evaporates off the palate and you're left wondering if you actually had anything. This lingers nicely, and if only we could get Christmas cake to taste like this, we'd be all right come festive season. And finally, the wine I've been looking forward to most out of all four of these. Alto, one of the eldest statesmen of the South African wine world. I think there have only been 4 or 5 winemakers in the whole history of Alto, and however long it's been running now. And the current winemaker, Bartu, this giant rugby player of a man, permanent smile on his face, and a great guy to spend time with. I've had lunch with Bartu a number of times, and I had lunch with him last year, and his 2015 Alto Cab Sauv was honestly as good a bottle of wine as I had in 2018. It was just outstanding and underscored what a stellar year 2015 was for Cabernet Sauvignon, especially out of the Stellenbosch region. So this is a couple of years older. This is the 2013. It was passed on to me by a guy called George Engelbrecht. Some of the older viewers amongst you might remember him. The former actor and dancer, used to dance on a lot of cruise liners before moving into the liquor industry, and he now looks after Distell in the northern part of South Africa, and he's a very, very big fan of this, and dropped it off promising me I'd enjoy it, and I think he was onto a pretty sure bet. It's old style classic Stellenbosch Cabernet Sauvignon from an old style classic Stellenbosch vineyard, and the combination is one that really appeals to Dan the wine drinker. Sometimes a wine almost doesn't need words, it just needs a look, and I hope you got that look. That was a look of pure satisfaction. There's been a wonderful wave, it's a wave I'm very happy with, of the lighter reds, the Cinsaults and the Carignans and the Pinots, and some of the lighter Syrahs and Pinotages sweeping through, and it's a style of wine I thoroughly enjoy. I'm a big fan of many of them, but sometimes you just want that big red wine, whether it's because you've got a large steak or it's a cold night, or your palate just feels like a big red wine, and mine does quite frequently. And here's a giant tick for a bottle for that particular job. It's a bit more expensive. That Tinto Baraka we just drunk was about 115 Rand. This is probably 220, 230 Rand a bottle, so it is a more expensive Cabernet Sauvignon, but this would be, I reckon, a terrific investment if you've got a little bit of money to spend on wine but not a huge amount. A case of this, so you're looking at what, in the region of about 1300 Rand, and put it away for 5-6 years, and then open that case for a very special dinner party, a very special celebration, or if it's just yourself, a very, very, very long day the next day, because it's going to age beautifully. This is already just drinking so nicely, so buy yourself a more recent, the 2015 if you can get hold of it, invest in it, and hang on to it. But if you find some of the 2013 now, maybe George Engelbrecht, if you can get hold of him through one of his fan sites on the internet, or through the guys at your local bottle store, or at Distell, or maybe Norman Goodfellows. They're always a good spot to look out for. It's a really strong Stellenbosch Cabernet Sauvignon. It's rich, it's regal, and it's just delightful to drink. And I've got absolutely no intention whatsoever of sharing this bottle with anyone else. But what I am very happy to share is the news of Distell's new charge. There'll be some challenges ahead, as there always are with a new venture, but in K Nash they've got somebody with plenty of experience in Richard Rushton. They've got a very passionate wine drinking, mountain bike riding, golf playing, cricket playing leader. And they've also just got some really strong brands backed by some really strong wine. I'd love to see them continue to do well in South Africa, they already do, but if we can take some of these big brands under the Libertas Estates and Vineyards umbrella and spread them out to the rest of the world, get more people talking about and drinking South African wine, then I genuinely do believe everybody wins, and hopefully more people will be drinking South African wine and realising just how good it really is. Richard, Kay and team, best of luck. I'll certainly be drinking plenty of the wine you make. Cheers.